This podcast contains material of highly sensitive nature, including religious beliefs, conspiracy theories, and corruption that may trigger some individuals. Your discretion is advised.
Thomas, the man, the myth, the legend. How's it going, bud?
Going really good, man. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. How really enjoyed that first episode.
That first episode was awesome.
Yeah.
I'd never done a podcast before, so it was nice to get the feet wet finally.
Yeah, same here. I've never even done a podcast myself, but I was really, really excited. A lot of good topics that we talked about, and I can't wait for the future.
Absolutely.
Future topics.
We'll touch on those again, but I know there's one specific one that you're wanting to go off today.
Oh,
one
yes.
Specific topic that you've been telling me about for a while now, and I'm interested to hear about it.
Yes, John Paul the First.
Right.
Do you know anything about John Paul the First?
Just the little bit that you've told me. I know that he was Pope for like 33 days only, and died suddenly and of a heart attack. There's some suspicious circumstances there.
Very suspicious, yeah. Not a lot of people. I asked because not a lot of people know who John Paul the First was.
Right, I'd never heard of him.
I didn't hear about him either until
you're the one that I've only heard about him from you. So it's kind of crazy just around the things surrounding the whole the conspiracy of how he died, and it's kind of interesting that you don't hear about him more.
Yeah, and I think that's on purpose.
Absolutely,
they're hiding.
There's something going on.
Something.
Yeah, absolutely. And if any,
and we will talk about why.
Yeah,
we will definitely talk about what they're hiding.
Let's get into it.
Yes. So Albino Luciani was his actual name. He was born in 1912 in northern Italy, and at 10 years old, he already knew he wanted to be a priest, which is remarkable, I think.
Yeah, it's got to take some very something happened where he, it spoke to him, I guess, that 10 years old, if you know that's what you're going to do, he did it for the rest of his life. So
yeah,
it's pretty crazy, at 10 years old that you basically found your calling.
That's what his mom said too, because his mom was Catholic. His dad was atheist, which is kind of a crazy combo back in the day.
That's what I'm saying. I wonder how the household was. I know in my own, it's an interesting dynamic with my parents sometimes. So not that that's exactly who they. One's religious, one's atheist. They both are religious in a way. My mom a lot, by comparison, but it definitely, I wonder,
Oh yeah, I hear you.
How that has to be for mom, sometimes.
Definitely from mom. I mean, my family, I'm half Mexican, half Portuguese, so I got the two cultures are most Catholic, and I mean, yeah, that's all they think about is church.
Yeah, and maybe it wasn't even as much as I think, in some households, maybe it's just yeah, I'm religious, you're not, that's fine,
Oh yeah, everyone should have their own opinion. And everyone should have their own beliefs, and I think everyone should respect everyone's beliefs. Yeah. It's like your mind's a universe, So you may think it's different than this other person. Your beliefs might be different than the other person, and who are you to even criticize? That's the way I see it.
No, I agree.
But back to John Paul first. So his mother, who was a strong Catholic, encouraged him to go to a minor monastery. And that's what he did. He met a friar that came to his town, and he knew he wanted to be a priest. But he needed his father's approval, which was not easy.
Oh, okay.
Because
that's the only way he was going to do it.
Yeah, the only way he can do it, I think, back in the day. Yeah, back in the days, if your old man says, no, you can't, then you can't. But him being he was a hard worker, a construction worker. He was a bricklayer. And he would go to town just to make ends meet. Because Luciani, he wasn't really, he lived in poverty. He had a brother and a sister, and he wasn't raised with a lot of income. So his dad told him, he says, well, if you do decide to do this, and I quote, please, pray for the workers and do it for the workers, meaning do it for the unfortunate. And Luciani did do that. He was in a lot of charities. He's a very educated human being. Yeah, he has a doctorate degree as well.
Which sounds like his dad would have made a great priest, the way that he speaks upon, doing charity and doing it for the poor and things like that.
And I wonder, I couldn't find this, but I wonder if his dad ever changed his mind.
Oh, like maybe converted
after seeing his son like that.
That would be.
I mean, that was something
that would be kind of cool, actually, if that's what. I mean, I'd have to look into that. I never thought to follow up on what his dad was doing. Yeah.
So at 10 years old, he would go, and starting at 10 years old, he grew up at 46 years old being a priest. He was highly thought of.
Right. And in the community that long, like you've got to happen to be known by, a lot of people. If you're, in a religious community like that for so long, I'm sure he became very well regarded.
Yeah. And the charity work he would do, this is remarkable, I think. The charity work he would do came from, it's called the Catholic Bank of Veneto. And that's who would actually help him financially. I guess you like sponsors back then. I don't know if they called them sponsors, and this to me was not a coincidence. Like, it was not out of a goodness out of this person's heart,
Do you think they were trying to get him in the pocket kind of thing?
They're trying to get him in the pocket.
Okay.
And I believe from what I read that they wanted the shares from the Vatican Bank. Right. And the Vatican Bank, there was a guy named Roberto Calvi, and weird nickname they gave him, the God Banker, which I thought, who would give a guy the God Banker?
Know. That's kind of sacrilegious almost. Yeah. Like who? I wonder if he took pride in that kind of I don't know who ordained that name on him, or who came up with that, but
yeah, well. When you
think that would inflate someone's head.
When you put God and banker together, there's some kind of corruption. Yeah. Some kind of, that's something I always felt in religion. You really, for me personally, it was more spiritual. It's not materialistic.
Yeah.
And I feel like money is materialistic.
Yeah, I feel like
even though they need it,
they need it, and I understand, too, because I think recently in my own, because like I was telling you before, I'm LDS, or I have LDS background, and recently they came under fire, because they have something of more than 90 something billion in savings, the LDS Church does, so kind of giving them a reputation of rich, and kind of making you think of them as big money, and which a lot of people in the LDS community didn't like that, and they didn't like having, that kind of
persona.
They didn't, it felt like they were being attacked or something like that, which I don't, I think it's important for a church to have a savings, and to be well off in a sense, and as long as they're using that money, which how often is that amount of money at play and there is not some type of corruption? Not very often. Somebody's in there doing something shady all the time. Right. And you have those types of numbers, that type of money. How does there not be some corruption somewhere? I don't think any church ever is really free of it.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely agree with that. But for instance, right now, it was, the Vatican, they're in the billions, right? When I say billions, I mean billions.
Billions and billions of dollars.
For me, I've never felt like any kind of religion should have that kind of money. Because with that kind of money comes great power. And with great power comes greed.
Right. It's always a level of it, nothing's incorruptible.
Yes.
So you're gonna, with that type of money, there's gonna be corruption. So what do you do? What can you do?
Well, especially in the Vatican, you can't do anything because they own their own banks.
Yeah, they're
the Vatican's not even. It's in Italy, but it's not Italy. You know what I mean? They have their own laws there. Yeah, you can't just show up.
Yeah, they're their own country.
Their
basically.
Own country. Yeah,
really,
pretty much.
Yeah.
So I thought that was interesting.
Crazy. Yeah.
But what's interesting about Roberto Calvi, aka the God Banker, was that he was more interested in buying shares from the Vatican Bank, right? And when he
So shares within that, shares that are
Vatican Bank
like
shares.
where you're owning the bank.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay.
Yeah, like this is my bank now.
Yeah.
Pretty much, I own
the
the
majority shares in
policies.
it.
I can do. I can change whatever I want.
So for
I
the
can,
Vatican Bank, he was interested in
and
getting that.
The bad part about that is when Alberto Luciani was doing charity work, he knew the money, he wasn't going to get the funds anymore. They don't work. They don't have money saved for themselves. They need this kind of income coming in. So all the work that he would do, he'd visit hospitals, go to children's orphanages. He would do a bunch of charity work like that. He was also very educated. He taught a lot as well. I knew he got a doctor degree.
Yeah.
And he was very, very smart human being. He would also, he taught a lot of the dogmatic moral of the theology and canon law. I have no idea what that is, but he taught it. You have any idea what that is? Have you heard of that?
Dogmatic and moral theology, canon law. No, I don't know.
Yeah.
So he was really well versed in that, though.
Oh, very educated.
Like he was had PhDs and stuff regarding these subjects.
So and I think because he started so young, that's probably what it was. But what I don't understand is so there was a man, right, and his name was Paul Marcellus. He was an American bishop from New York.
Okay.
And Paul Marcellus somehow sold the shares to Roberto Calvi. He sold all these shares, $43 million worth of shares.
Holy crap.
How can one guy do that?
I don't know. I mean, so he owned these shares? That's what I'm
the Vatican owned these shares, and he's part of the Vatican.
So he was able to just go in and,
yeah, I mean,
like he had some power there.
He had some power,
like to sell parts of this.
And this is where it gets blurry because you look it up. I mean, I can't find anything on that. Like, how was he able to sell that much?
And what was like the motive behind selling it, if there was motive, and the motive of buying it? From who was it that bought it? So
the person that bought it was Roberto Calvi. He was a chairman of Banco Ambrosiano, and so this is where it gets kind of tricky. So when he bought it, it wasn't just him. The mob. He was backed by the mob. He was a big mobster, and for someone to sell you that kind of share, I wonder if there's some kind of intimidation tactic that they use, or like what would give him the idea of be like, yeah, I want to sell all 43 million, and I don't think anyone's gonna care. Like, it makes no sense to me whatsoever.
It wouldn't surprise me. I mean, and 43, and like we were saying, the Vatican's billions of dollars.
Yeah.
So 43 million. How much is that? Of it? Is that like?
Well, this is like in the 70s.
Which is a good point.
So I mean, it was a good share. I couldn't see the percentage.
And what the net worth of the Vatican in the 70s was, I don't know.
It's very secretive.
Yeah.
Vatican's very secretive, especially when it comes to finances. And I'm sure he got a piece of that.
Yeah.
I'm sure.
I mean, for one person, $43 million of shares, that sounds like a lot.
Yeah, that sounded like a lot. And the crazy part is when Luciani found out, he was told he had a good friend, and his friend was named Giovanni Bonelli, who's also a bishop at this time. And Giovanni Bonelli told him, he says, look, this is what happened. And I can't imagine the shock that he would know, because that's a lot of money back in the day. So back in those days, not John Paul.
Because he must have known who this person was.
Yeah, he knows who it is.
Who, like, these shares went to, and it's like, oh, this is somebody in the mob? Like,
it had a lot of ties to the mob, right? And when he went, he confronted Paul Marcellus, and of course he's gonna deny that he got any percent of the shares, which again, blurry. Why was he able to sell all those shares? $43 million worth.
That's my question too. I mean, I feel like that should be very regulated when shares are sold, and if it's if these are shares, these are Vatican shares. Like, this is something that
it was out of the Catholic Bank of the Vatican Bank. That's what it's called.
Yeah, you'd think like this would be when shares like that are bought and sold. That I would feel like the cardinals are kind of like the heads of the Catholic Church, right? That there would be like a lot of oversight from the cardinals
Right. Yeah. I wonder if he did that just out of like, he might have been threatened.
Yeah.
He
Was
might have
this
been.
and was this guy the God banker guy? Right?
Yeah.
Was he a cardinal? He
No,
wasn't a
no.
cardinal,
He was
right?
actually a chairman of the Banco Ambrosiano,
Mm.
and he was a businessman, and he had ties with the mob. And what was
Hmm.
crazy was when Luciani found out at the time, Pope John the Sixth,
Mm-hmm.
he was the only one that can probably do something about it, right?
Yeah. Was this the predecessor to to John Paul the
Yes.
first?
Hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, and he was very close because John Paul sorry, not John Paul, Pope Paul the Sixth,
Mm-hmm.
he was actually very close to Luciani and even handpicked him to be a bishop, which is
Oh yeah,
yeah.
I remember you said that. So, which is insane to me in some way that there's like a level of a bias I feel like from something like that happening
Hmm.
when the Pope kind of reaches out and been like this is kind of the favored person.
Yeah.
And so that's got to influence too, I feel like, the voting of the cardinals of who's going to be pope next. Well, our previous pope, this, he was favored.
He
He
was the,
favored
yeah.
this guy. So, how do you not have like a level of bias there?
Well,
From
also
the pope before.
the Paul Marcellus also became bishop because he was also handpicked by the Pope. And 2 years prior to this scandal, Marcellus actually saved Paul the Sixth's life. He saved it because he got a knife attack in the Philippines, and he saved him from it.
Oh wow.
And Luciani always thought he covered his, he pretty much covered his ass because he owed it to him.
Mm.
So Luciani had no one to tell. He couldn't tell anybody without making like a huge scene, I believe. Because if you go and you make a big scene about it,
Yeah.
you can be erased. You
Right.
can be something can happen, and to be that fearful, something had to go on.
Yeah.
Because
Definitely.
he could have came out and say, look, this is what's
So he
happening.
felt like he kind of owed him favors and things like that. Is that what you're
Yeah,
saying?
he just because he Marcellus Bishop Marcellus saved him.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that was insane when I heard
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, that adds another dynamic for sure.
So there's a reason why we don't hear about it, probably.
Yeah.
The cover up.
Yeah.
So when that happened, he couldn't do anything about it. He kept quiet.
Okay.
He kept quiet, and
That makes sense.
mhm.
Yeah.
and Robert Calvi, who was not only ties to the mob, he's been investigated by the FBI several times.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah, and
Just
so
because of the ties that he does have,
because of the ties he
like,
has.
definitely, he's probably under watch all the time then.
So when the FBI went to in New York City, went to Bishop Marcello's office, they couldn't get any kind of info. The only person I can give an info was, guess, who do you think?
the Pope.
The Pope, yeah.
Oh, okay.
And guess who's not going to say anything?
The Pope.
The Pope. He's not going to
I
say anything. Paul the Sixth would not say anything. So that puts him in a dilemma. So I think that's why he kept quiet for so long.
Mm-hmm.
And it was pretty insane how that happened. So finally, in 1979, I believe, John Paul VI dies. Right.
Right. Right.
And when he dies, they have to have a new pope. Now you got to remember, everyone knows, Luciani knows this, right? Because it's in the group. I'm sure after the bishops asked him, the bishops asked him if he can do something about it, and he declined. He couldn't do it. The word was around that he knew about the corruptions and the shares that was sold and everything about Robert Calvani. So it wasn't a secret between him.
Yeah, he was very much read into what was happening on that.
Yeah, and it's kind of crazy to me because it's kind of like destined how do I say it? Like, this had to happen because if it wasn't for his charity works and for the bank that donated the money, and for Roberto Calvi, if they never would have connected, maybe he would still be alive, back in the day. Maybe he wouldn't be Pope only for 33 days. Does that make sense?
So, yeah, kind of. I mean, like I said, I haven't read into it as much as you have, made all the connections, but I feel like, that would make sense, you know, as long as like, you know, somewhere at some point, you know, he learned a little too much and had a run in with fate, I guess, you know, if you're in there and you know too much and you're of that mindset of, you know, dig deeper, dig deeper, dig deeper, eventually
Hmm.
you're going to get to that, you know, that dangerous place, you know. Yeah, like you don't.
Yeah, I feel like something like that cannot just be overnight be dealt with.
Yeah.
I feel like it was that. But then anyway,
Yeah.
so we get a new pope, and guess who gets chosen?
Luciano.
Luciano. Out of 111 voters, 90 of them chose Luciano. Now remember, he was very beloved from his charity work. You know, I'm sure he was very involved in the communities. They even called him the Smiling Pope.
Yeah.
Because he was always smiling.
Yeah, and it's crazy. Like it makes it even more weird, I feel like, when you're that beloved.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you're that and you win by that many votes.
Yeah.
And for the conspiracy basically to state this guy sounds like he was murdered, you know, it's like, man, that's such a out there, like wild card to throw, you know, like just because of how well regarded he was.
Yeah. I mean, to be in that position, I don't think it was. I mean, I
Do you think he wanted to be there?
I don't think he wanted to.
No.
You know, when he was asked to be pope, he hesitated. He hesitated a lot, and he even said, and I quote, this is words that he said. He goes, "I will not be pope for long."
Oh wow.
You know, and that's.
I mean, Mystic Mac over here.
Mystic Mac, yeah. I mean, so what happened was once he became pope, he wasn't able to do a lot of the things he promised his dad. You know, and what I loved about Luciani was they do this big old ceremony where they put the crown on you, and they do a big old spectrum, a show, and you know they have millions of people. He didn't want any of that. It was more of an inauguration, like, okay, I'm here, I'm taking pope, and that's it.
Yeah, like he had a level of humility.
He
like,
had such a level of humility.
Mm-hmm.
So that was always odd to me. But so he becomes pope, and then 33 days later, he's dead.
Freaking.
Yeah. So
That's crazy, though. You know, 33 days, and that's all the time you get as pope. And why would that be? You know, I don't know. Like, because, so what happened to him, you know, was, it says they kind of like think that he was poisoned. The conspiracies say it's poison, you know, that's the way it seems like from the way he was found.
Yeah, he was actually found in his bedroom, sitting up and reading a book. Like
yeah, like
so,
he had like there was actually two accounts from what I heard through my research before we started, was that the initial account was that he had I don't know if it was like a figure of Christ or a figure of like he was holding something that was like a representation of Christ or something like that. And then later on they recanted, no, what he had was like some type of like lessons or something, like documents.
Like
something that wasn't the same thing. So there was a level of inconsistency happening there.
So this is where the conspiracy starts.
Mm-hmm.
So the conspiracy started more after his death than anything else, right? So the reason you and I can't get the research because they're inconsistent. They don't know. Nobody knows what the actual story is.
There's not real
because they do their private
documentation.
investigation on it.
Yeah, there's not, and they don't like. There's not like filed documents and things like that. I mean, if there is, then exactly, they're so secretive about it, we'll never see them. But yeah, there's like no police reports. There's no autopsy happening.
Yeah, no. So by Vatican law, I mean the 24-hour rule. You know, they have to leave the body, and I believe it was because they wanted to purify. Is that right?
Like they were afraid the body would putrefy.
Putrefy, yes.
So they had ended up embalming him 6 hours after they found him dead.
Whoa.
So 6 hours. So that's, against the law right there, right? The Vatican law states that they need to wait at least 24 hours. Is that right?
Yes.
And I think in the case of his predecessor, they gave him that time and more so. It wasn't the same. The same circumstances didn't apply to Pope Paul VI. So there's already, that's kind of, the reason for the conspiracy right there. That's like the biggest thing right there, is that why would you go, immediately to embalming 6 hours after death? The reason they gave was, because, right, like what we just said, like they didn't want the body to putrefy. It's really hot. It's the summer. But literally 33 days earlier, that's not what happened. So
totally different. The crazy part is that they didn't even drain his blood.
Yeah.
Because I think a fear of finding
something in the blood.
Which
there was an FBI gentleman who talks about what he thinks the poison could have been. I think it was Paul Williams who worked for who investigated with the FBI. He talks about Digitas as being the potential poison used on now
Digitas. I believe that's can stop your heart, can it?
Yeah, like I think that's and it's actually like didroxyl or something, or didroxy. That's like the active ingredient or some in the Digitas. And what can cause death, which is the lethal component, and what they detect if they're testing for it. That's what they're detecting. So they of course never got a chance to run those tests, and embalming could potentially, depending on how they embalmed them too. That's like you gotta think about how they embalmed them. Could have, even if they went for an autopsy and blood tests, if they embalmed them to a degree, where they put so much embalming fluid, then it would cause the poison to be masked.
Right.
So, but you'd have to use a lot of embalming fluid though for that. Well, and obviously, they weren't going to let anybody even try.
Yeah.
So it's like maybe they may not have even thought to like make it a thing to use more embalming fluid or whatever. I mean, they were already not concerned because, hey, we're not going to let you autopsy his body, obviously. So
yeah, and which I don't see a reason why they wouldn't. But also, what I did when I did research, I saw that that day before he went to bed, he went to a couple meetings and a dinner. Now, why don't they ever talk about who he went to dinner with or who he met with?
I would be interested in knowing. You know,
these are Vatican files that the FBI couldn't even get.
So,
see, that's why I'm so. I don't know.
Yeah, I feel like there's got to be. There needs to be somewhere, somehow, a level of accountability here. And when you have something like a church where it's basically the church is the government, you know, here. So where is there any where do you have any accountability? Where do you have oversight? Who is the oversight? You know, that would be a question that I have. You know, who is there? They've got to have people within the Vatican, I'm sure, that do investigate matters and things of the like. But again, there's a level of bias there. It's like you having the police department investigate the police department, you know? So
they don't let the FBI in anything. They don't let anyone, because I'm sure the Vatican has their own law enforcement as well.
Right.
I would have to look into that, but I'm sure they do. They have their own investigations. And what's crazy that I thought was, so his secretary is the one that found him. At 5 a.m, she would always take him his coffee. That was his like morning routine, right?
Yeah.
And when he didn't pick up his coffee, you know, she left it in front of his door. That's when she went and straight and told the Vatican Secretary of State. And he, as soon as he found out that, Luciano, he was ice cold. So they say, oh yeah, heart attack. He already called for the embalming of the Pope. Like he didn't even hesitate to say, oh, let's do an investigation. Let's find out what happened, how long he's been like this. Nothing.
And that was his secretary who did that, or it was
the Vatican Secretary of State.
And
made
that decision.
Made that decision saying, So he was on the scene right off. Like, why would you be on the scene already? You know?
Yeah.
That's another thing that
like
was weird.
immediately right there. That is weird. And again, this goes beyond what law has stated. So like you have to follow certain um, protocols apparently. Within the Vatican, and again, those protocols were just totally tossed out the window for this one pope. Like why?
Yeah. And he was such a good human being,
Right.
The reason I was so interested in the story was because the charity work and how knowledgeable he was, his background. I mean, he was a person of morals. He had a lot of morals. Because let me tell you, the Vatican, there's always going to be some kind of corruption. Like we talked about earlier, when it comes to money, power.
Yeah. And with any church, there's got to be a level. There's got to be somewhere, not the whole thing. Nobody can be 100% squeaky clean.
Yeah.
Especially with it like a religious group, I feel like there's always going to be some level of corruption.
And you want to hear the worst part of this? After he passed away, it was noted that the God's banker, right? Roberto Calvi was hung from under a London bridge.
Oh, suicided himself, did he?
Was it suicide?
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. It's all like, oh yeah, they suicided him. It's like he. Yeah, it sounds like
the God's banker under a London bridge hung right after.
That's insane.
Now, if you connect both of those, obviously the Vatican knows what's going on. How do you think they said, you know what, we're not going to take a chance?
Well, I mean,
we already got the Pope.
It feels like that's what happened. It's like, when within conspiracy, when you just have like, a random suicide, like that, it raises a lot of questions. He was very close with what was going on at the time, so I feel like he knew something. There was, and like maybe he was going to talk, and
because I believe those shares that he purchased didn't. I mean, obviously it didn't come from him. If he was tied to the mob,
right? And then like, what happened to the shares after he died?
Nobody knows.
Yeah,
nobody knows where any of that went. Any of that money went, and if they do know, it's the Vatican that knows, and no one else.
Yeah.
And I always thought
because he had the ties to the mob, right? The man who hung himself.
Yeah, the FBI. The FBI were on. They knew everything about him.
Right.
Because obviously those shares came to the United States.
So
and now it's an American.
He was in the pocket probably with the mob. The mob already had this guy, God's banker, in their pocket. And
already being a chairman of the Banco of Ambrosiano. I hope I don't fuck that one up, but yeah, he's already a chairman of a bank. He has power. He has ties with the mob.
Right.
So I feel to lure in Bishop Paul Marcellus wasn't that difficult. But the question is, did he lure him with money, with threats?
Probably
with
threats. I would.
You believe so?
In something like this, I feel like threats are more work better. Like threatening loved ones, family members and things like that are.
That could be.
I think a lot of people,
especially
keep their mouths shut and like
anything Italian too, right?
Yeah. Right. I know that's like always a go-to, right? With the mob, it's like.
So I just wanted to
hit you where it hurts.
I just wanted to talk about this because it was kind of really sad to hear something like that, and to me it's sad how people because they've had popes. I mean, I don't even know, the 14th century or something like that, 5th century, and a lot of people praise all the good the Pope's done, but nobody talks about Pope John Paul the First.
Yeah, and I know he wasn't Pope for long, but he sounds like he had a huge influence on the church, just in terms of like how beloved he was.
He's very beloved.
Like people just.
I mean, when you get the nickname the Smiling Pope,
I
don't know if there's any other popes that have nicknames like that.
Yeah. He looked like a nice guy. I've seen some popes and they look pretty crazy.
Yeah.
But he just looked like, hey, that's a nice dude,
Yeah, he was a nice human being. And I just felt like we should mention it here in our second episode. And I'm pretty excited to talk about it. And, I'm sure later on in the future will be a part 2 about this.
Yeah, I think we've only,
We've only scratched the surface.
Yeah,
We're just
exactly.
talking
There's
about
a lot
it right
more
now.
stuff. There's few more things, I could think of that I could, go on about.
And the person you said was William. I'm sorry, what was his name again?
Paul Williams.
Paul Williams.
Yeah.
He worked for the FBI for 10 years. Is that?
I'm not sure how long he worked.
Yeah.
I know he was involved like in that case, kind of like trying to figure out what was going on. Of course, he was stonewalled by the Vatican, couldn't really find out much. But that was his opinion, though, was conspiracy. Was that, it sounds like he believed he was murdered.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, was he murdered or just a heart attack coincidence? That's the big question on John Paul.
Yeah. We can touch on that more, definitely.
Definitely touch on that. So, well, anything else you want to say, Thomas?
No, just thanks for having me again today. Yeah.
Anytime. I love having these conversations with you. And before we leave, I do want to have a quote from John Paul.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
John Paul the first. When asked to take leadership of Pope, John Paul hesitated, and once hesitating, looked around and said, "May God forgive you for what you have done." Thanks, everybody.